Hello, amazing sixth graders. It's Mrs. Hebert. We are going to start lesson 2.1, so that means module 2, lesson 1, but we're going to actually break it into two parts. We're going to do two different pages in our math notebooks. So the first one will be 2.1a and the second one will be 2.1b because there's a lot of information to cover in lesson 2.1. So in your table of contents, if you will go to it, you need to add 2.1a and call it greatest common factor, which is also known as GCF, and that will be on pages 5 and 6 in your notebook. And then underneath that, you're going to label lesson 2.1b, greatest common factor, also known as GCF, for pages 7 and 8. Okay, if you will turn to page 5 in your math notebook and label it as page 5, at the top you need to write the heading as Module 2, Factors and Multiples. That's what this chapter is about. They're called modules in this math series, but it's basically the same idea as a chapter. So put that at the top, and then on the top line you're going to label this 2.1a, greatest common factor. Then using your ruler, divide the paper up into 6 sections. Okay, go to box number 1, and remember sometimes I use a stylus, and so I'm using a whole page, but you need to put this information in only box 1 on page 5. So in box 1, we're just going to do a review really quickly of factors. And so you need to write the definition of factors. Factors are numbers that are multiplied together to get a product. And remember, a product is the answer in a multiplication problem. So for example, in the multiplication problem, 4 times 3 equals 12. 4 and 3 are the numbers you multiply together, so those are called factors. 12 is your answer in a multiplication problem, so 12 is called the product. So write the definition and the example. Okay, moving on to box 2, we're going to write the definition of a common factor. A common factor is a factor that is shared by 2 or more numbers. So for example, for 6 and 12, if those are the two numbers I'm looking at, and I want to find the common factor or factors that 6 and 12 have, I'm going to look for the numbers that you would multiply to get 6 and 12, and I'm going to look for the factors that are the same. So in 6, I can either multiply 1 times 6 to get 6 or 2 times 3. My factors are 1, 6, 2, and 3. In 12, I can multiply 1 times 12, that should say. Sorry, hold on just a moment. Okay, so yes, add in a 1 there. That should be 1 times 12. And then 2 times 6 can be multiplied to get 12, and 3 times 4 can be multiplied to get 12. So my factors for 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. Then what I do is I look at those numbers and I can compare which factors do they have in common. Well, 6 and 12 both have 1 as a factor because all numbers have 1. They both have 2 as a factor. They both have 3 as a factor, and they both have 6 as a factor. They do not have, 4 is not a common factor because it's only a factor in 12, and 12 is not a common factor because it is not a factor for 6. Okay, moving on to box 3. We're going to do another definition, and that is the definition for greatest common factor. We will often refer to the greatest common factor as the GCF. You just need to get used to referring to it that way. The GCF, or greatest common factor, is the greatest factor of two or more numbers. So for example, for the numbers 6 and 12, the GCF is 6 because 6 is the greatest factor they have in common. And we're going to talk about more about how to figure that out coming up. But for now, just write this definition and example. Okay, moving to box number 4, you're going to write the definitions for a prime number and a composite number. A prime number is a number that has only 1 and itself for factors. So examples of prime numbers would be 1, because you can only multiply 1 times 1 to get 1. 2, because you can only multiply 1 times 2 to get 2. 3, because you can only multiply 1 times 3 to get 3. 5, because you can only multiply 1 times 5 to get 5, and so on. And you could go on forever finding prime numbers. But the idea is that the only factors they have are 1 and themselves for prime numbers. Then composite numbers, a composite number is a number that has more factors than one of its and itself. So for example, 4, because you can multiply 1 times 4 to get 4, but you can also multiply 2 times 2. And since it has more factors than just 1 in itself, it's called a composite number. The same thing is true for 6. You can multiply 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. And 8, you could do 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. 9, you can multiply 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. And so on. So if it has more factors than just 1 in itself, it's called a composite number. Okay, going on to box 5, we are going to look at our first example. This is example number 1. So if you are asked to find the GCF, or greatest common factor, for 18 and 21, we're going to use the basic method. We'll say, and we'll write down 18 and we'll list all of the factors. So we just start and we go 18, you can do 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6. You may not use 4 because there's nothing times 4 to get 18. You may not use 5. You may use 6, but we already have it listed, so we're done. Looking at 21, we have 1 times 21, 3 times 7. There's nothing else. There are no other factors of 21. So then we compare those lists and we circle the common factors. The common factors would be 1 and 3. But there are no other common factors for 18 and 21. So the greatest common factor would be the largest of those two factors. And so in this case, the GCF is 3. Okay, let's do another example. In box number 6, this is example 2, and we are going to find the greatest common factor, or GCF, for 21 and 36. I'm sorry, 24 and 36. So let's start by listing all the factors of 24. 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6. You may not use 5 because nothing times 5 equals 24. You may use 6, but we already have it, so we're done. Looking at 36, it's 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 times 6. Because it's 6 times 6, we only have to list the 6 one time because it's the same factor. So you can see that this system works, but sometimes the bigger the number, the longer your list is going to get. So we're going to be talking about some shorter ways to find the GCF, but for right now, this is one way to do it. So you list all the factors of each number, and then you compare and you circle the factors that they have in common. So 24 and 36 both have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12 in common. I look at the greatest of those factors, which number has the greatest value, and it's 12. So the greatest common factor for 24 and 36 is 12. And that completes the first part of 2.1. That's 2.1a. We're done with this page. So leave the next page blank, the right-hand side blank, for classwork because we're going to do some more examples in class.